Conjunctions are an essential part of the English language, and they frequently play an important role in SAT grammar questions. Generally, a conjunction is a word that connects phrases, clauses, or complete sentences. On the SAT, we'll mostly be thinking about the conjunction and, with the words but and so appearing occasionally. You might remember that these words are part of fanboys, which is the mnemonic device that many students learn to help them memorize the conjunctions. But I personally don't like this list because it doesn't include all of the conjunctions and it emphasizes words that aren't often used as conjunctions. For example, the first fanboy for is rarely used as a conjunction in modern English, so the rules that we're about to review for commas and conjunctions won't really apply to the word for. In fact, the word for is typically a preposition, which will rarely get a comma. But the fanboy and does get a comma because of how it connects sentences. To make this even more confusing, there are lots of other words that behave like conjunctions but don't follow the same punctuation rules. These are just a few examples. Words like because are technically conjunctions, just like and, but, and so. But because almost never gets a comma, while, as we'll see, the word and often does. For now, don't worry about all of this complexity. SAT conjunction questions will almost always focus on the punctuation rules surrounding the word and, so this lesson will focus on those rules too. The punctuation rules for other connector words are more complicated and more dependent on the overall structure of the sentence. Luckily, they are not as common on the SAT, and there will usually be other clues in the question to help you choose the correct punctuation. For now, let's look at the three main ways that we use the word and. When we have a list of two things, the word and does not get a comma. The two things can be nouns, as in the cat and the dog have fleas, or they can be verbs, as in the dog barked and growled at the cat. But if we have a list of three or more things, then the word and should get a comma right before it. Again, the list could be nouns like the cat, the dog, and their owner have fleas, or the list could be verbs like he rubbed, itched, and scratched it. This is sometimes called the Oxford comma, and weird grammar nerds talk about it a lot. That's because some style guides say that it's not necessary to use this final comma in lists of three or more, so weirdos on the internet end up debating whether that's good advice. But none of it matters for the SAT. You always need the Oxford comma for lists of three or more things on the SAT. You also need a comma when you're using and to connect two complete sentences or independent clauses. The cat has fleas is its own sentence that we could end with a period. So is it's going to spread to the dog. So if we want to connect those two independent clauses, we need a comma and a conjunction. If we only used the comma, we would have a run-on sentence. If we only used the conjunction, we would have a run-on sentence. On the SAT, you need to have both. Though, in real life, you can skip the comma if the sentences are very short. The dog barked and the cat ran. But I really want to stress that this exception will not appear on an SAT. Mostly, it's because it's too subjective. What counts as a short sentence? Remember that every SAT question will have one provable right answer and three provably incorrect answers. If you ever feel like two answers could be correct, then you are misreading the question or missing something important. Let's look at some more examples that show how subtle the SAT can be when it tests conjunction rules. For the first example, we can highlight the list of two. Rebecca created and wrote. She did two things. We should not use a comma before the conjunction and. In the second example, we've added a third item to the list. Rebecca built, created, and wrote. Now we need the comma before the conjunction and. Notice that even though the wording of the sentences stayed mostly the same, we still need to adjust the punctuation. In this third example, the change to the wording is even less noticeable. We've only added the word she, but that one addition turns the second part of our list into a complete sentence that could stand alone. She wrote original songs. And now that we are connecting two sentences, we need a comma before the conjunction and. Take another look at example 1 and example 3. I really want to emphasize that they say the exact same thing about Rebecca Morse. There is no difference in the meaning of these two examples. But by adding the word she in example 3, we've added a subject for the verb wrote, turning this into an independent clause. The SAT is going to try to confuse you between these two examples. Let's see how we can use the conjunction rules to avoid getting tricked. The first thing to remember is that we can't rely on how the sentences sound. The answer choices make it obvious that we need to think about punctuation and sentence structure, and those rules are difficult to hear correctly because commas don't really make a noise. We want to look for complete sentences, which is a strategy we use whenever we're sorting through punctuation rules. The answer choices help me see this question as having three parts. The first part, despite its current recognition as a popular Olympic event, is a dependent or extra clause. It's an introduction to the main sentence, but it could not stand on its own as a separate sentence. The phrase, despite this, is the giveaway for me, but it also sounds like it ends abruptly when I stop at the comma. The second part sounds like a complete sentence to me. Skateboarding began as an underground sport in the 1970s. I could end that sentence with a period if I wanted to. The final part also sounds like a sentence. It was frequently disparaged as a public nuisance as late as the 1990s. Now that we know that these are two independent clauses, we are very limited in the ways we can connect them. Choices A and B would both create run-on sentences. We need some sort of punctuation to show the break between the two sentences, but a comma is not strong enough to join the sentences by itself. Similarly, the conjunction and is not strong enough by itself, so choice D is also a run-on sentence. We need the comma and conjunction to work together to connect these two independent clauses, so only choice C can be correct, even though all of the answer choices sound okay if we read the sentences aloud. But let's clear the board and make a very slight change to this question. If we keep everything the same, except we delete the word it right after the blank, we'll completely change our answer. Now the final part is not an independent clause. It's the second item in a list of two. Skateboarding began in the 70s and was frequently disparaged in the 90s. We still need the conjunction, but we do not need the comma. Our answer becomes choice D. This is exactly the kind of thing that the SAT is trying to trick you with. Slight changes to the structure of a sentence can completely change its punctuation, especially when we're thinking about conjunctions. Let's look at one more example that rearranges our sentence. We should still be on the lookout for complete sentences. This question actually has three independent clauses that are all joined together in a single sentence. 1. Skateboarding began as an underground sport in the 1970s. 2. It was frequently disparaged as a public nuisance as late as the 1990s. 3. Now it is a popular Olympic event. But we actually only care about sentences 2 and 3. Sentences 1 and 2 are already correctly joined by a comma and our favorite conjunction and. Looking at the blank, we know that choice D is wrong because we need some sort of punctuation between sentences 2 and 3. We might consider choice A, which has the conjunction but. Notice though that there's no comma, and we need one when there are two sentences. Choice B seems to fix this problem, but however wasn't really in our list of conjunctions. In fact, both choices A and B are traps. But and however do mean the same thing, but they're not interchangeable. However is a bigger word and needs more complicated punctuation to use it. I'll cover those rules in a separate lesson on connector placement. In this question, we're forced to omit the transition word completely because A and B don't have the correct punctuation. You hopefully remember that a semicolon is a perfectly legitimate way to join two independent clauses, so it's provably the correct answer here. This is a good reminder that the SAT sometimes offers us conjunctions, but they won't always be correct. We should think of conjunctions as just another way that we can possibly connect two sentences. So with that in mind, let's put everything we've learned about conjunctions in context. First, the rules we discussed mostly apply to the common conjunctions and, but, and so on the SAT. Other conjunctions and connectors could come up on the SAT, but the rules will be more dependent on the unique features of the question. In general, there are three main rules that we'll need to think about with conjunctions like and. We do not use a comma when and is used in a list of two things, but we do use a comma for lists of three or more, or when we have two complete sentences. But remember that there are other ways to join two sentences in English and on the SAT. In your own writing, you pretty much only use periods and the comma plus conjunction rule that we talked about in this lesson. But the SAT also makes you join sentences with semicolons, colons, and dashes. So make sure you watch my lessons on those punctuation marks as well. Hopefully, you now know how to confidently use conjunctions on the SAT. Thanks for watching.